Hey, good morning, Bill.
Hey, good morning, Congressman. Glad you've taken a few minutes to talk to us folks down here in Valdosta, Georgia. Just looking forward to kind of opening up, see where you're at and what you're dealing with in Washington, D.C. under this Democrat president that we're dealing with now, and how that's affecting Georgia, and kind of get your thoughts on, of course, the border, what's going on there, and all the different things that matter to the people here in Valdosta.
Sure. We're ready when you are.
So go ahead. Tell me what's going on in D.C. What's your thoughts about the Inflation Reduction Act, such as it is, and then how you feel about what's going on at our southern border, what Ron DeSantis is doing, and Governor Abbott. What are your thoughts on those things?
Yeah, well, let me take you back just a couple of years, because what the press wants you to believe and what the Democrats want you to believe is that President Trump was the most partisan president we've ever had. When, in fact, everything that President Trump passed after COVID hit was done in a bipartisan manner and passed, in some cases, unanimously. And so now we're dealing with an administration that doesn't even meet with Republicans, and everything they've done in the last 2 years has been strictly down partisan lines. And so Biden is the most partisan president that I've ever dealt with, much more partisan than President Obama was, and certainly if you look at just the facts on the votes, much more partisan than President Trump was. And the end result of that is that they've passed things that basically kicked inflation into record territory. And the crazy thing about this is when President Biden gets interviewed on the news with regard to inflation, even though it's at 40-year highs, he goes back to, well, it only went up 0.1% last month, but it went up 8.3% on the previous 12 months. And he acts as if, bringing gas from, almost $5 a gallon down to $3.50 a gallon is good when it was $2 a gallon before he was elected. And so I think, there's a serious disconnect between what's actually happening in Washington and specifically at the White House and what's happening every day in our American lives. And I can tell you from the standpoint of my family and I, we certainly don't go through the drive-through like we used to.
Yeah.
And when we go to the grocery store, we buy what's on sale, not what we necessarily went hoping to buy that day. And so just a huge disconnect between the D.C. Democrats and what's actually happening in America. So you look at that and what's happening in our everyday lives and the economy. I expect the Fed will raise rates again between 0.75 of a point and a point this week. That is the end result of bad policy, and the bad policy started when Biden canceled the Keystone Pipeline and the attacks on our oil and gas industry inside the United States. He actually gave, literally, Bill, the Saudi Arabian prince has more control over the U.S. economy right now than Congress and the President of the United States do, because the Saudi prince has the ability to go to OPEC and cut production.
Yeah.
And so the end result of these policies, Aramco has become the most profitable company in the history of the world. The Saudi prince has the ability to send us into a recession anytime he wants to, and it's just it's bad governing from Joe Biden.
Yeah, and we see it from the whole, Democrat Party. And then his speech the other day, not only are we divided on the floor, he's dividing all of Americans.
Absolutely, on any particular issue that he can. And Bill, I'll tell you this, it doesn't get talked about a lot in the press, but if you go back to the COVID relief package, there was a provision in that package that said whatever you owe the USDA, it was Section 1005 in the COVID relief package, whatever you owe the USDA, you were supposed to get 120% of it. Now 4 out of 4 federal judges ruled it unconstitutional because it was based solely on the race of the farmer. And now CNN and all of the press, they won't talk about how they're injecting race into eligibility of government programs in the Democratic Party, but that's exactly what they're doing. Now, most Americans, when you talk about that, that's not what they want. They recognize that sends the country in the wrong direction. But it's just it's a partisan administration, the most partisan I've ever dealt with in my years in office, and they're basically frozen in fear of making a decision. So you look at what's happening with the border. in Tifton, Georgia, my hometown.
My hometown too, by the way.
Great place. In my hometown, they seized enough fentanyl, I believe it was last week, maybe in the week before, to kill 270,000 Americans. Well, there are only about 40,000 people that live in Tift County.
Yeah.
So how is this happening? Why can't we shut the door to our home being America?
I get it, yeah.
And say, if you want to come in this country, if you want to come in our home, you got to knock on the door and you got to have permission. But you can't bring a bunch of fentanyl into this country.
Yeah.
And they simply won't do it. This is not that hard. It's not that hard to govern. And it's an administration that's frozen in fear of doing anything with regard to the border because of the people who control their state, their party, and these are the people that want to create sanctuary cities and other things. And if you think sanctuary cities are good, you should go to one.
Yeah.
You really should.
And I love that what Ron DeSantis is doing, what Governor Abbott's doing, and I think this is bringing light to the rest of the country that, hey, look, we're suffering in Texas and in Arizona and parts of California. Why not everybody else see exactly what we're dealing with? We in Georgia, we're not a border state, but we have quite a few that have made their way into Georgia and Florida as well.
Sure, and listen, what chaps me so much, Bill, is when you see the White House say, "Oh, well, the governors are using these people as pawns." When Donald Trump was president, there was an agreement. That agreement was a DACA solution for border security. And it was Pelosi and Schumer that refused to accept that agreement because they did not want President Trump to get the credit for having a DACA solution. I think most Americans today would take that. You secure the border, stop this nonsense from coming in.
Yeah, let Border Patrol deal with those that are coming across illegally. They could do that if we could shut everything else down and people that want to come for asylum come through the gates that are there.
That's right, and they should apply for asylum in their country of origin.
Yeah.
Before they get to the U.S. border, which is one of the things that President Trump was doing. But remember this: they've had the House, the Senate, and the presidency for almost 24 months now. Have they passed the DACA solution?
No.
And the answer is no. It is the Democratic Party that has used these people as pawns, and the immigration advocates recognize that they've been used as pawns. And when they go on the TV and they say that the Republican governors are using the people as pawns, it's just totally disingenuous. When the Democrats have had the House, the Senate, and the presidency, they haven't passed a DACA solution. Not only have they not passed a DACA solution, there was a DACA solution that was available under President Trump. The trade was one piece of legislation, strict border security for a DACA solution, and it was Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and the Democratic Party that turned that down. When Bill, I think 90% of Americans would accept that. I think Democrats would accept it and Republicans would accept it, but they did not want President Trump to get credit for it.
Yeah.
So had they taken that deal, we wouldn't be dealing with all of the fentanyl that's coming in the country right now, but they hated President Trump so bad they just didn't want him to get credit for it.
Yeah. Well, kind of shift gears a minute. Climate change, in my opinion, is a vessel that the Democrats are using to push an agenda, period. Plain and simple. What's your thoughts on climate change? And, of course, the, quote, Inflation Reduction Act really is just that one big package to push this this climate crisis.
Yeah, well, one of the big threats, Bill, right now is where you're starting to see where the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, is wanting to score corporations based on their ESG commitment. Yeah. And many of these big corporations that are pushing ESG are building big factories in India, China, and other places where they get 100% of their energy from coal, and women have no rights. And so it's very hypocritical for big corporations to press the ESG movement inside the United States, and then turn around and ship our jobs to these other countries where they don't have to comply with them. But that's exactly what's happening. And so you look at the growth in India, you look at the growth that's been occurring over the last several years in China. I mean, these big corporations are pressing for these rules inside the United States, and then they're moving their jobs to countries where they don't apply to them.
Yeah.
And so what they did in the last bill with ESG, the mandate on vehicles, if you will, it's absolutely ridiculous, because if you look at the actual environmental impact of the manufacturing of the batteries, of the charging of the batteries, of the recycling or the disposal of the batteries, electric vehicles are not the cleanest things in the world. Yeah,
and we don't have the grid. We don't have the grid to ask California. We don't have the grid to charge them.
Well, that's what you could have the grid if you allowed nuclear power.
Yeah,
I mean you could have the grid if you allowed energy that worked. So clean energy is available out there. Nuclear power is something we should have been expanding in this country for years. It's but it's not happening. And if you look at a company if you look at the Keystone Pipeline, that company put decades into building that pipeline through the regulatory process, and then ultimately through a political stunt, Joe Biden killed it. And so who wants to do business in this country anymore when you can't start construction for 20 years? Yeah. It's just bad, Bill.
It is. And I also wanted to ask you a little bit about our defense. Of course, you've got Moody Air Force Base here in our town. Yep. You got Robbins Air Force Base. The number of volunteers in our volunteer Army now is struggling. We can't get people to join the Army. How important is it that we figure out something about our defense of this country?
Well, first of all, I want you to know this. The Senate, and you should call our two U.S. senators and ask them why Chuck Schumer has refused to put the National Defense Authorization Act on the floor of the U.S. Senate this year. But the House passed the National Defense Authorization Act months and months and months ago in a very bipartisan manner, Bill. That bill came out of committee with only one dissenting vote. That dissenting vote was Ro Khanna, who is a Bernie Sanders guy. Yeah. And our national security has historically been something that, on a bipartisan manner, we just put the partisanship aside and we deal with what we have to in the NDAA. The Senate won't even put the bill on the floor, and that is just because Chuck Schumer has got a social agenda and not a national security agenda. So keep that in mind. And there are only 5 legislative days left before the election. But what I want you to know is the men and women that serve in our military, they are fed up with being micromanaged, and they're fed up with people in the DOD going through all of their Facebook posts and anything and everything else that they've ever done in their life. Let's just admit none of us are perfect. Yeah. And finding a reason to kick them out. And then you turn around and you look at what I forget what her title was, the lady that is at the DOD in charge of. Whatever her title is, diversity, equity, and inclusion, who says she's fed up with white folks. Jeez. Well, let's reverse that for a second. And this is what America's fed up with. We just need a uniform standard. So you've got a black lady that says she's fed up with white folks, and she still has her job in the government, in the DOD, as head of diversity, equity, and inclusion. If a white person had posted they were fed up with black folks, that person would have been terminated immediately. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so what America is fed up with is the double standard. And we just need we need a standard that is uniform. And I think that what you're seeing in the military is the frustration with that double standard. Yeah, and like I say, a lack of people even wanting to volunteer anymore. Obviously, too, you mentioned I get your regular newsletter, weekly newsletter. I encourage people to do that. Keep up with. You do a great job with that, getting out some information. And obviously, one of the big things is going to be the Farm Bill. And of course, that in an agricultural area like Georgia, it's going to speak volumes. What are you seeing in that arena? Yeah, so I'm very worried about where we are with regard to agriculture. And Bill, what I want Americans to understand is this: 90% of our food supply. 90% of our food supply comes from 12% of the farms inside the United States. So that 12% that produces the 90%, we have to make sure that those farms have crop insurance, access to capital, the ability to transfer those farms to the next generation, or we're not going to have the food supply. If you look at what the proposals are inside of D.C. right now with regard to those families, they want to go back and charge the federal estate tax on the land transfer. That kills those farm families.
Yeah.
They want to charge capital gains tax on the transfer of those assets as well. That kills those farm families. So they look at it from the standpoint of the 12% of the farmers that produce 90% of our food supply, or from the standpoint of total assets, they are, for the most part, wealthy from the standpoint of the value of the land, the value of the tractors, and everything else. That doesn't mean their return on equity is big. They do it because they love it. But if you break down that 12%, you're not breaking down the 12%. You're breaking down the 90% of our food supply.
Wow.
And my fear is that if you look at what the Democratic Party continues to press for, they continue to press policies that are bad for the 12% that produce the 90%. And if you break down the 12%, you're going to break down the food supply inside the United States. So when we go to write the Farm Bill, we're going to have to make sure that Americans understand that if you don't have the crop insurance systems and the risk management systems for those farmers, those large farmers, then you're putting your food supply at risk inside this country. So we're going to write that bill next year. We're going to be fair in it. We do want the SNAP benefits to be time limited. I'm not in favor of what the Democrats are, where they simply want someone, once you get on SNAP, to be able to stay on SNAP forever. I do realize that families fall on hard times. I do think SNAP benefits should be time limited for people that are able-bodied working age adults. And so we're going to continue to press for the integrity measures in the SNAP programs. But the most important part of it is making sure that we have the food supply that's produced by that 12%.
Yeah. And ultimately, we need to keep people like you, conservative voices that care about agriculture and things like that, in office. But our Senate race is so important too, because the Raphael Warnocks of that, they don't understand agriculture. They don't understand, and I don't think, as you say, they're not gonna vote that way. Our Senate race is so important in Georgia right now to get somebody, because they need to be on those committees that deal with agriculture.
Yeah, well, and they're, I will tell you, if you look at what they're for, they are for the tax policies that break down that American farm family.
Yeah.
And so, again, if you break down the 12% of the American farmers that produce 90% of our food supply, you're going to break down the food supply inside the United States. And so I'm all for Herschel. I have been for a long time, and he's in D.C. today. I just tell you, I mean, it is a question of, do you want to Chuck Schumer in charge of the United States Senate, who won't put a national defense authorization bill on the floor of the Senate? And again, this is a bill that passed out of committee on the House side, like 59-1, Bill. This is not a partisan bill. This is about national security. Schumer refuses to even put the bill on the floor. So if you want Chuck Schumer and his social agenda to be in charge of the United States Senate, then stick with what you got. But if you think we can do better, then you're going to have to put a different senator up there. And for me, Herschel Walker is the choice. There is no choice, really. It's got to be Herschel, because we got to get rid of Chuck Schumer. Yeah, and agricultural, too. Tyler Harper, running for Commissioner of Agriculture here in Georgia, I think is very for family farms. He's from a family farm. My wife's family is family farms. So many people in Tifton and around this area have family farms, and it's so important that we maintain that. Well, that's right, and aside from just the farm, though, Bill, you got to have the food that comes off the farm. Yep. Publix doesn't grow the produce. Yeah, they don't. I mean, it comes on a truck. It comes on a truck, and we don't need to be dependent on foreign sources of food which is where the Democratic policies are going to take us, just like they've made us dependent on foreign sources of oil.
Yeah. We could talk for hours on all this stuff, but ultimately, too, for farmers, the cost of their goods diesel, fertilizer, it's really hamstringing a lot of farmers from the biggest to the smallest.
Oh, yeah. Look, when we pull into, number one, we farm with diesel, not gasoline.
Right.
So when you pull in and you fill up your vehicle, think about the farmer who's buying it 9,000 gallons at the time. I mean, and that's what's happening to their cost.
Yeah.
And so I don't see inflation in the food supply going away because of the bad policy that's been passed, in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, farmers are struggling. Of course, the cost of fertilizers, all the other things, too.
Sure.
Congressman, I appreciate you taking time out this morning. I hope we can have you back on again as we move through the year. And, of course, obviously, you are running for your seat again, and you've got some opposition. But I don't foresee that being a big opposition at this point. We need to keep voices like yours in office. And so if people want to get connected with you, get your weekly newsletter, what can they do? You got a website that they can go to?
Yeah, just come to our website and sign up for it. It's you can Google Congressman Austin Scott, and it'll take you straight to it.
Yeah, and like I say, you talked about the 75th anniversary of the Air Force and that, and all the other different things. It's a great way to keep up with things that are going on. And again, keep that up. I appreciate that. I read it each week.
It's austinscott.house.gov. You can Google it instead of writing all that down. But you'll see some of the committee work.
Yeah.
And other things we're doing as well.
Absolutely. Well, Congressman, next time you're down the South, I know you were here a few weeks ago. Love to meet and see you and be in this area. And you, I feel like, are connected. You're in this area pretty regularly and kind of touching base, and that's important for what our listeners feel like is that we've lost touch, or our congressmen and women and senators have kind of lost touch of reality. And so,
I feel that way too, and I'm up here.
And we need to have that touch of reality. Well, Congressman, thanks again for taking time out, and of course we'll be voting for you come November 8th, and hope to see you continue on with all the efforts there as well.
Thanks, Bill.
All right, thank you. Have a great day.